Alright, so let's talk about compositing this thing into a base. And by that, I mean we need the reflections in the ground, which was not at all close to what I said there before. So we need this shiny thing from our character. The way to do that is actually fairly straightforward. You can actually just do that in, wow, that's weirdly close for a bounce light. You can actually just do that in your AI shadow mat. So we pop into our ground shadow mat, and if you look under specular, there is a tick box for indirect specular, which will give you this shiny thing in your base, which is, in this case, exactly what we want. You also have some settings for roughness, so the less rough you make that, I'm going to just do this part, it'll be way faster. So the more, or the less rough you do things, the crisper this is going to be. The more rough, you get a sort of blurrier, in this case you're not even really seeing much of anything there. And it's kind of end up compositing with the weird figure over here, but in this case I don't find it to be particularly noticeable, so I'm going to ignore it. So this whole thing is relatively not rough. Or I'm sorry, yeah, it's not rough. It's a shiny piece of acrylic that is just dusty and gross, but it's meant to have a pretty much mirror reflection. So what I'm gonna do is just mess a little bit with the some of the values in here just to see if I can break this up ever so slightly. So this is basically just adding a little noise map into this to basically see. That's going crazy again. To see if I can just break that up a little bit to kind of replicate the dust. So nothing terribly fancy there, and frankly, it's probably not super noticeable in the renders. Let me for fun render this from my perspective camera and see what that gets us. Yeah, so I mean, you can see here that this is actually probably broken up a little bit too much. Where this is the reflection. So in this case, if you're looking for pond ripples, it's probably actually pretty solid, but I don't want pond ripples. So what I'm going to do is, I think, use this angle to sort of, again, just adjust the place 2D texture and then mess a little bit with like the ratio and stuff like that. Because I think I was perhaps a little bit overzealous in adjusting that. I'm actually also like super bad at adjusting noise textures like this. So I think what I'm going to do is just maybe set this to like 4 or something, and then maybe just go in and like I want more, or I want this to be very shiny, so I'm going to take the, sorry, I want this to be more shiny, which means I need black values in here. I'm going to mess with the threshold or amplitude, I can never remember which is which, until this is generally more blackish. So now we have something like this that reads a little bit better than the whatever water ripples we had before. That's like largely optional. You can kind of see there's like 1 or 2 areas of like smudging. I think it's kind of a nice touch, I guess. But that's basically that. And actually, that's pretty much all you really need to do for the shadow mat, honestly, to get that shiny reflection. So if we look at the alpha channel, you can see we have some little things with shadows over here, and this is also should pop up when we save this image. So let's hop back over to our render cam and actually render out the entire scene thing. But in this case, I actually want the image plane to not render in this because I'm going to be trying to, that actually doesn't look completely horrible. I want the image plane to be compositing, what am I saying? I want all of my stuff that I'm rendering separate from my image plane. That's what I'm trying to say. Cool. Excuse me. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to, there should be somewhere in here, for some reason, I just like never find it. So I'm actually, yes, sorry. So there it is, I think. I'm gonna go into my image display and change it from RGBA to none, and hopefully that makes it not show up in the render, which is in fact what happens. Yay. Finding the tricks for things. And in this case, just based on the angle, so we're still getting, should be a tiny bit of that reflection in here, but it's just like a little bit less noticeable from this angle, I think. So we'll see what happens when we plop that in our final render, because you definitely do see it there. It is just very subtle. So let's go ahead and actually let this finish rendering like a real people person thing. And since I still have this thing open in Photoshop, it should be relatively straightforward. Just plop this on top. And there's a few other passes that I'm probably going to do to this, but mostly I wanted to focus on the shiny stuff for now. So let's go ahead and save this as some kind of file with, I'll just do shadows dot pick. Because that should render with transparency. And when I say should, I mean probably won't because Maya is a spaz, but here we are. Okay, so that is going to be in my images folder. And if we just plop this in here, it did not render with transparency. Huzzah! Alright, let's try this again with Shadows EXR. That didn't used to be an issue, but now it's like, just for some reason, I like have all the issues. Oh, I should also, shoot. I'm gonna be a bad person. I'm rendering this at half size, so I'm actually going to shift my image size down to, 540, 960 by 540. So now we just have a really crappy low resolution image. I'm gonna import this as transparency. And you can see that it should plop down right in there. And in this case, we don't have a lot of interesting shadow detail or anything going on. But we are getting a very, very subtle reflection in that table. And honestly, my really janky solution, if I usually want that brighter, you could re-render stuff, which is probably the reasonable thing to do, but you can also just get really janky and be like, I'm just gonna duplicate this like a bajillion times, like a crazy person, and now we have a more transparent or a opaque or more aggressive render there. So not that I would do that if I was rendering like 8 bajillion things, because that's probably like not the best way to go about things, and by probably means definitely not. But it is an option of a thing that can be done. Now what I do actually want to do very quickly is sort of change this up a little bit. So I'm going to do a few different renders. One of them is only going to be this character. And then that's going to give me control because I'm looking at this Photoshop file and this is like a little bright. And I'm actually, you know what, I'm going to start a new video for this. Hang on a sec.